The Trudeau government plans to launch a program that would compensate owners for surrendering firearms that have been banned since May. The initiative is outlined in Bill C-21, which would also allow municipalities to ban handguns. The proposed legislation would also extend the ban to air guns that look like real firearms. The bill was introduced last week, 9 months after the Liberals banned the use, sale, and importation of more than 1,500 makes and models of firearms. Well, sports shooters and hunters say the decisions don't reflect the reality of those who legally buy weapons and why. Cassie Premack sells guns at her shop in Prince George, BC, and she's filed a judicial review of the government's earlier ban of 1,500 guns in May. Hi, Cassie. Thanks so much for being with us on Canada Tonight.
Hi, Janella. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, tell me a little bit about why you're taking the government to court. On what basis?
So my business is a family-owned business. We are a center of a community here in Prince George. So we offer sports shooting rifles, hunting rifles, ammunition, airsoft gear, all sorts of things to our community. We have worked really hard as a family to make sure that this was a safe place for families like ours to come and purchase the things they needed to enjoy these activities. So when May 1st happened and the OIC went into place, we stood to lose $75,000 worth of inventory overnight. Which is a huge blow to our business. We have only been open as a storefront for, it'll be 2 years in June. Prior to that, we were a home-based business. So we worked really hard to build our business to the place it's at, and to lose such a large quantity of inventory without any due process and without a conversation was incredibly disheartening.
Sorry.
Go
ahead. Finish your thought.
So for our family, it was really important that we acknowledge that this wasn't okay, that there needs to be due process in Canada. There needs to be conversation. It's not that I feel like the OIC, it's important to have checks and balances. It's important to have regulations around firearm control. I don't discount that. But when you're doing it by OIC, when you're not doing it with conversation, you're not talking about to the people who are really involved in this, it's not okay.
So explain to me also how the buyback program that's being floated by the federal government impacts your business. Are you able to sell your firearms back to them? And we don't have a price yet, but do you have any idea if it'll be worth it for you?
We have no acknowledgement from Bill Blair whether or not businesses even qualify under the buyback program that he discussed. When he talks about it, he often says it's for firearms owners. So personally, my personal collection of firearms, my family's firearms collection, they would be eligible for the buyback program, to my understanding, at a discounted amount from what we actually purchased our firearms at. But as a business, he hasn't acknowledged the billions of dollars that would cost to recoup in the industry. I mean, the firearms industry in Canada is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
So Minister Blair says that none of the firearms that are on this list of banned are used for hunting, that they're weapons for killing people. Do you disagree with that statement?
I wholeheartedly disagree with that statement. I understand that any firearm can be used as a weapon, but the firearms that he's talking about are tools. These are firearms. They are not weapons. They are not a weapon until they're used to commit a crime or they're used to harm a person. So the firearms that he's prohibited under the OIC typically were used for sport shooting, and the sport shooting community in Canada is huge. There are over 1.2 million registered sport shooters in Canada. That's over 2 times the amount of registered hockey players in Canada, just to put it into reference. And when you're looking at some of these firearms, like the Mini 14, they're actually the Ruger Ranch rifle. It is a hunting rifle. It is meant for varmint control. It's not typically a military assault style weapon as they're being toted.
I mean, I will say some hunters disagree, or there are some different schools of thought on this. Some hunters say there are still other options for hunting that aren't on this list.
No, and there are still bolt-action rifles, but some bolt-action rifles were targeted under this list. And that's a big misconception. It isn't all semi-automatic firearms that were targeted under the OIC. Just the other day, I had a customer in asking me about his Weatherby Mark V Deluxe, and his caliber had been prohibited as a variant under the OIC, which is a bolt-action rifle. That is a hunting rifle.
So do you feel like there is a disconnect between sort of the cities where, often crime is happening and sort of the rural areas where hunting is happening? Do you feel like there's a disconnect?
I feel there's a huge disconnect, and I understand the fear and the desire to keep your family safe. I don't hold that against any person living in urban Canada. I understand that for them, their only interactions with firearms are typically related to gang violence, and they just want to keep their family safe. I don't discount that. However, the firearms being used in those crimes statistically are not sourced from legal firearms owners. They're not used for hunting. They are typically handguns, and they are sourced out of the country typically.
I do want to reference, two major gun crimes that happened in this country were used with legal firearms. Montreal Massacre was carried out by a legally obtained Ruger Mini 14, and the Nova Scotia attack was a legal firearm that was obtained from a late friend. So in these cases, these were legal firearms and they were used to carry out mass shootings. So the argument often is that we shouldn't even have these weapons available in Canadian homes where they can be used for nefarious purposes. How do you respond to that argument?
I think there's a huge disconnect. The needs of rural Canadians and the rest of Canada are very different than those in urban centers, right? There is this very dense population in areas like Toronto and Montreal and Halifax, and I understand that for them, these aren't tools that they use often. But when you live in rural Canada, when you live in the rest of the country, hunting is still really prevalent. There are cultural significances to hunting for the Indigenous communities. There are significant reasons to have them on farms. And for the sport shooting community, which is a multi-million-dollar industry in Canada, they're incredibly important to their sport and aren't being used for crimes.
All right, Cassie Premack is a firearm vendor in Prince George, and she's filed a judicial review of the government's earlier ban of 1,500 guns. Thanks so much for being with us, Cassie.
Thank you for having me.